Alrighty guys, so when the Russo brothers left the MCU after Avengers Endgame, I think we all kind of assumed, maybe even subconsciously, at least I did, that the Russos would be back at some point to direct another MCU movie. Whether or not it was going to be the culmination of the multiverse saga, I don't know. I think I originally thought maybe they would wait until the X-Men or something like that, a mutant-centered story way down the line. Maybe they really wanted to take a break from the MCU. But, lo and behold, and we got other directors originally to direct these Avengers films. Destin Daniel Cretton, who is now doing allegedly doing Shang-Chi 2, and of course doing Spider-Man 4, was originally going to direct Avengers Kang Dynasty before it got changed to Doomsday. And, I think that I had assumed at that point, the Russos, they're not going to come back, and we're kind of set there, and we'll see what happens. But then a lot of things changed. Obviously, the Jonathan Majors drama was a big part of it, and, we ended up here. And here is Avengers Doomsday coming out in May 2026 and Avengers Secret Wars coming out in May 2027. Now, there is an issue of Empire magazine in which the Russo brothers are going to give some interviews. And I think the full issue is coming out later on in the week. And so maybe there will be more to come out of this next week that we'll talk about. But for now, there's a little snippet here. A couple quotes that I wanted to talk about just briefly because I think that it's fun and it's interesting to just see what their state of mind was. And I think it's actually encouraging, to hear the reasons why they came back for these Avengers films. And it kind of gives me hope that, while the multiverse saga has been overall hit or miss, I think that we can at least end those two, end this saga with those two films on a good note. Because look, for me personally, I'm not expecting at this point Avengers Doomsday or Avengers Secret Wars to be even close to the highs of Infinity War and Endgame. Because not only, in my opinion, were Infinity War and Endgame really good films, really good MCU films as well, but they were the culmination, right? And they were the culmination of one of the most satisfying arcs in movie franchise history. I don't think there's any way to satisfyingly tie up the multiverse saga because it's all over the place. But if they can just deliver two really good movies, and all the questions aside about, hey, where's Moon Knight, and, why isn't X character here, and what happened to X storyline, and why the Eternal, if they can just, all that aside, because I don't expect them to really be tying up all those things. I really don't, right? I really don't expect them to. But if they can deliver two really solid, really good Avengers movies, I'll be happy. So anyways, getting back to this Empire article, there are a couple quotes that they preview here before the issue comes out, and they're returning to the MCU. And so we're going to read these quotes as usual, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. So this is the first quote from Anthony Russo. He says, quote, "Endgame was the end, and it took a little time for us to begin to think about it as something other than an end," Anthony Russo says. Okay, that one was pretty clear. They've said it before that, after Endgame, they were done. And you can totally imagine that, right? Because Avengers Infinity War and Endgame were these behemoth undertakings. Like, nothing has ever been done like that in cinema history. Even, you can argue like, the Avatar films are kind of on the same scale, but I mean, it's a little different, right? I think it's a little different in that, you're wrangling all these actors, you're trying to collect the storylines from 20 previous films. It's a behemoth undertaking. So it's understandable. They're like, we're done. And then so Anthony just talked about the fact that, but at a certain point we were like, well, maybe we can come back. And so this is the next quote here. I think this is Joe Russo talking. He says, quote, "We're very close with Kevin and Lou," that's Kevin Feige and Louis D'Esposito, the big bosses at Marvel Studios. And he continues, "and the entire Marvel team, and we've had conversations through the years. We've talked about a lot of ideas." Okay? And then he continues, quote, "You couldn't see it coming until it came." Or actually, sorry, I just skipped a couple things. Let's go back here. So he says, "We've talked about a lot of ideas." Continuing on. "Really what happened was we ended up stumbling upon an idea that activated all of us. You couldn't see it coming until it came. And once it came, it was like, well, there's a story. That's a story we need to tell." And then I'm going to read one more quote here, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. So he says, quote, "There were ideas we were trying to wrap our heads around that preceded this one being the Secret Wars Doomsday storyline, and we just never found the story." He says, then he talks about the process of actually getting McFeely, the writer, on board. He says, quote, "I remember calling Steve and saying, 'Hey, crazy idea. What do you think if we all go back and do Secret Wars?'" Joe Russo says. And he continues, "And you were like," you being McFeely, "you were like, not to swear, F no," is what McFeely said. "Absolutely not. And then you hung up. And the next morning at 7:30 you called and were like, 'All right, I have an idea.' And that is the beginning of Doomsday and Secret Wars." So really, also, by the way, I just want to point out what happened to Marcus, because if you remember the writing duo that wrote Civil War, Winter Soldier, Infinity War, and Endgame were Marcus and McFeely. So I don't know what Christopher Marcus is doing. Here's hoping that Christopher Marcus was not the linchpin that held everything together, because The one thing is like when the Russos get together and work with McFeely and Marcus, they're batting 1,000. This is a baseball analogy that will go over a lot of people's heads, but they're slugging, way high, and they're hitting home runs left and right, and they're all their stats are just beautiful, pristine. But then it's like, what if you take out one part of that lineup, and it turns out that part of the lineup was what was really holding everything together? I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying I hope that's not the case, because that would be so unfortunate. I have all the faith in McFeely and the two Russos to get it done. But what's really encouraging about this is that it does seem like, and again, money talks, and sure, they might be paying the Russos a ton of money to come back, but I think what's really encouraging at the end of the day is that it seems like they really wanted to come back because they wanted to come back. And look, that sounds obvious, right? Well, duh, you want to do something because you want to do something, duh. But I think with these films, right, especially in franchises, it's not just limited to comic book franchises. It could be any franchise where the director is kind of the visionary or the spearheads, or they've had a lot of success with the first films or whatever. And then they're like, well, gotta come back and do the sequel. And, maybe they didn't want to. I don't know what was going on in Todd Phillips' head, for example, the director of Joker and Joker Folie à Deux. You've heard things about Todd Phillips saying, no way, we never wanted to do another one. And then it was kind of like, well, we kind of had to do another one. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying, for example, if that were the case, then that's an example of him being like, yeah, I mean, didn't really want to do another one, but we had to do another one. I think about Joss Whedon as well. Again, personal things aside, just as a director, he did the first one, and you're kind of obligated to do the second one, even though the second one I don't think excited him as much. I know Ultron excited him, but I think he had to do a lot of other things, and it was more obligation, I think, at that point. And I like Avengers Age of Ultron, but I don't think Whedon was convinced it was the movie that he really wanted to make. So, look, I mean, a lot of things can happen from here on now. Doomsday and Secret Wars could be terrible movies, right? But what's encouraging about this to me is the fact that they had an idea for a story, probably related to the fact that Robert Downey Jr. is coming back as Doom, right? That was probably one of the big points where they were like, oh, interesting, and then they went with it from there. But I'm fascinated by the fact and really encouraged by the fact that it looks like this is a story that they really wanted to tell, and not one where they were just forced to come back and do it. I think while yes, you could have done and you certainly could have done Doomsday and Secret Wars with any other directors that were successful. Like, you could have brought back Jon Favreau. You could have done it with John Watts, who was my pick to do it, for a long time, because I think John Watts is amazing. Quietly underrated in Hollywood. But, you could have definitely done it with them. And so the fact that the Russos were like, no, we want to come back and do this, I think is encouraging. I think that's a good sign. But let me know in the comments down below. Do you guys take this as a good sign, or does it mean nothing at all? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below.